Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about a woman who started a hospital in Uganda and why she is getting sued. This is currently on NPR, this is where I heard it, so I'm going to talk to you about all the details and what's going on with her, and let's get into it. So basically what happened is a woman with no medical training opened a hospital and was treating children in Uganda. If you're not familiar with where Uganda is, it is a country in the continent of Africa. And before I get into the details of this case, I'm going to tell you that the U.S. perception of what Africa is like is completely backwards of what it actually is like. As a person who grew up in the United States and has never been to Africa, I know that I've been taught just by media and in school and things like that that Africa is this extremely poor continent and everyone lives in huts and everyone is dying and everyone's malnourished and everything like that. And in some areas of some countries that is true. People are very sick, very poor, living in, houses that they built, very small things that they built, and they are suffering from malaria, HIV, AIDS, things like that. That is true. But the entire continent is not like that. There are people who live in the cities who are college educated and are doctors, and they have, working electricity and running water. It's not like a complete third world country. So the U.S. perception of what Africa is like kind of enabled this woman to get away with what she's been doing for nearly 10 years. So I'm going to talk about this woman. Her name is Rachel Bach. She is from Virginia, and she is one who's heavily involved in her church, and when she was 19, she took a mission trip to Uganda, and she witnessed a very, very poor area of Uganda and what is happening to these children, how a lot of them are suffering and are dying and things like that, and it really, pulled on her heart and made she felt like she had to do something to help. I can see why she would feel this way. I think anyone would feel that way. The issue is that she didn't get any proper training, proper licenses, proper anything to actually do what she did. So I'm really happy that you did that, but you didn't do a very good job, and a lot of children have died in the time that you've been there. So she is being sued by the country of Uganda for running a unauthorized clinic and for all the deaths that she potentially caused or perpetuated in her time there. So this is how she got started. She went there in her mission trip and she came back and she raised a lot of money from a lot of churches in her hometown to be able to go back and open up a clinic. So she rented a house in a city called Jinga, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, which is a poor area of Uganda, and she started taking in children who were malnourished. At that point, when she first started, she would just do what she could to feed the children. Like twice a week, people would just come to that house and were able to eat the food that she provided, and they weren't like staying there. But a hospital near there kind of found out what she was doing, and they're like, oh, we need your help. So this is the point where she should have been like, I'm not qualified. But she didn't. She started this off as a charity organization, and she called it Serving His Children. Whatever. And she used this charity to be able to feed hungry children in Uganda. Very, very noble work. But when the hospital approached her, she should have really taken a step back and said, if you want me to do that, I need to do some things first. But she was young, probably didn't know the rules, probably didn't realize what she was going to get herself into. Not an excuse, but maybe, get somebody to help you if you were not knowing what to do. I don't know. She doesn't really think that this lawsuit is appropriate, but I think it is. I think it is. Yeah, I'm gonna go with it is. So after the hospital called her and said that they needed her help, in 2010, she got this home up and running to where she was able to take in children and then keep them there and start getting them back to being nourished or whatever. If anybody has ever been to this country, or if you've done a 30-hour famine, a lot of churches do that in like youth groups where you don't eat for 30 hours and then they make this special thing that you're supposed to eat to like re-nourish you so you don't like overload yourself or whatever. It's like corn and mush, whatever. So there's probably something particular they're supposed to be refeeding them with. So I don't know exactly what she was feeding them or what she even had access to in the area, but you can't just dump a bunch of food into somebody who's been malnourished for so long. But I don't know the details of what she was feeding them when she first started. So she's at this for a while, and she's got a board of directors back here in the States that are helping her run her charity, and a nurse from North Dakota gets wind of what she's doing, and initially she's inspired. She says, wow, this is amazing what you're doing, and I would really love to get involved. So she ends up moving out there, and she plans to stay there for a year and help her with this clinic in Uganda. At this point, Rachel had already hired 3 other nurses that are from Uganda that were helping to, handle things that were going on, but there would be up to 12 children in her care at one time. So let's remember that Rachel does not have any medical training. She probably doesn't even have any college training because she's been in Uganda since she was 19, 20-ish. So when would she have gone to college to get any kind of degree to be able to run a facility such as this? So she's kind of just flying by the seat of her pants. Literally, Dr. Google is helping her because it's only her and 3 other nurses. So who makes the call on what to do with these children? During her entire time, she was blogging online about what she was doing. So unfortunately, that was found by the people who were filing against her. So they're using all of her blog posts against her in court. So at this point, she did have medical equipment, including oxygen, IVs, things you can use to monitor as well. So she did have kind of, a little thing going there. So when the nurse arrived, initially she was, very optimistic, helping, and then she kind of realized that these kids are like really sick. It's not just they're malnourished. They have a lot of other comorbidities that are complicating their care. A lot of them have HIV. They could have Hep C, malaria, things that are very, very complex to treat, and you can't just like do whatever you want and then not worry about their comorbidities. It's just... So we're going to talk about a baby named Patricia. So Patricia is a very young baby, and her mother finds out about this hospital that's being run by white people, according to the article. I didn't make that up. That's what the article said. And she takes her baby there because her baby is very sick. Rachel starts running tests on her, blood tests, puts in an IV, which she's not qualified to do. Just going to point that out, to do any of those things. She finds out that her hemoglobin is extremely low, like 3.9, I think, 3.2. So she diagnoses her, someone with no medical training makes diagnoses now, diagnoses her with malaria and that she needs a blood transfusion. So if any of you have ever been a part of a blood transfusion before, you will know that there's a lot of things that go into it before it can be administered. Sure, there's probably not a lot of rules that are different between United States and Uganda. I don't really know, but she needs to type and screen. She needs to be educated on what's going to happen. Obviously, her parents need to be educated on the potential risks. They need to find a donor. They need to test the donor. I talked about blood transfusions in a previous video that I will link up here. There's lots of things that go into a blood transfusion. Their blood needs to be tested, it needs to be chilled. Did she do any of that? I'm going to go with probably not. So, so she starts a good old-fashioned blood transfusion on this baby. During the transfusion, the RN from North Dakota shows up for her scheduled time, and the baby looks terrible. It's very clear that she's having a transfusion reaction, and the nurse is like, what are you doing? Stop the transfusion. So what does Rachel say?
Well, I thought that she might be having a transfusion, but I Googled it, and it says they're supposed to have a rash if they're having a reaction, and she doesn't have a rash.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
So Google told her that it wasn't a transfusion reaction, so Patricia was eventually taken to a local hospital. She was treated. She did live. So that is at least some good news that came out of this. But there are 105 other children that were not so lucky. At this point, the RN had been there for a few months, and she was like, yeah, actually, you know what? This is totally illegal, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. So she left, and only 4 months into her year-long stay, she did report what was going on to the charity's board directors back in the U.S., but nothing happened. Nothing came of that. You might wonder why the nurse didn't report her to the police, to the United States police, to the Ugandan police, something. As I said earlier about how the U.S. perceives African countries, a lot of people who are, doing God's work in African countries are just considered to be helping, and there is a percentage of death in all healthcare settings. So she's perceived as a hero, as a saint, as, oh my God, she's doing so much good work. And so when something like that is going on, people are like, well, she's helping, but she's helping though, because, Africa's so poor, they need the help. So here's the death rate of her camp, her hospital, her clinic for 3 years. 2011, about 20% of children died in her care. A third of those that did die would die within the first 2 days of being there. That seems high, and it is, but considering her lack of, not even her lack of knowledge, considering her lack of resources and how sick these people are, yes, people are going to die. 20% is kind of like an international standard for places like this, so not unusual, but honestly, in her case, she would have been better off just not helping them at all. That's my opinion. In 2012, it reduced to 18%, and in 2013, she ended up hiring 2 doctors from Uganda to help her, so the death rate was decreased to 10%, which is better than 20%, but still kind of sucks. So in 2015, the RN from North Dakota is still seeing that she's still practicing and still doing what she's doing and still doesn't have a license and anything else like that. So she is like, you know what, this needs to be brought to the police's attention. So she does alert the authorities in Uganda, and about a couple days later, it's completely shut down and investigated. So at this point, she's been running for 6 years almost before anyone finds out what she's really doing. So it does seem that Rachel tried to get the proper license to be able to run this facility, but she got an outpatient license in 2014 and it expired. She let it expire. So even though she did get a license, it wasn't even the proper license that she needed to actually run that facility. So good effort, but you kind of missed the mark there. So honestly, I think she was very irresponsible for her to do this. I understand that she felt a calling from God to do this, but God forgot to mention that she needed to be trained to do this, and you can't just give kids whatever you want. Malnourished kids are very complex to treat. One thing that I can tell you is that electrolytes are very important. Something Rachel probably doesn't know because she's not medically trained. But you can't just give fluids to somebody, especially someone who's so extremely malnourished, because if their electrolytes are imbalanced and they get to be too imbalanced, potassium, sodium, things like that, you're going to cause cardiac issues and then what? You don't have any equipment to do anything else to help them if they were to have a cardiac event, so that probably contributed to the 20% that we were referring to earlier. So it's really unfortunate that this had to kind of happen this way, and she even was able to reopen her clinic later in Uganda. Like she got a couple things lined up and she was able to reopen it, but she wasn't actually treating patients at the time. It was kind of in conjunction with the government. They're now filing a suit against her for the 105 deaths that she potentially caused or perpetuated. The hearing is set for January of 2020. I will be following this case in case any new information comes about. But yeah, she deserves to be prosecuted. I don't know what's really going to happen to her. She is back in Virginia. She does not plan to return to Uganda, which is probably smart because they're gonna probably throw you in jail. Oh shit. So that's what's going on with Rachel and her clinic that was completely illegal. Let me know what you think down below. I would love to hear from you, and I will see you guys in the next one.